Good evening. Welcome back to Dylan Talks Tone. This is episode 3 of the podcast where we discuss everything having to do with tone and your electric guitar. Anything from the pick, fingers, strings, all the way on through to the amp, effects, all that kind of stuff, all the way out to the speaker and the air in the room. I mean, it's all involved, right? In the tone that we try to make every week, every day, and when we play guitar. So, today we're going to discuss a few things. I put a little thing out on social media over the last week, and I asked, what are some things on your mind? And I noticed on social media that this last week, a big thing was string weight. That was a huge deal, and people are like, I've seen, Billy Gibbons, he plays like an 8, and he still has really big tone. But then Stevie Ray Vaughan plays 13s, and he has a really big tone. And then somebody asked me about scale length also, and so we're gonna talk about those two things because I believe that in the conversation about tone, those two things are related. So basically, the bottom line is, and we always hear this, right, that the tone is in your fingers. Obviously, the majority of the tone is in your fingers. But this means that our first interface with the guitar actually is the neck, the strings, and the fretboard with our left hand. That is a major contributor to our interface with the guitar. And if you think about this, this is just kind of not even having to do with tone yet, but just think about the mechanics of playing. If you play a real fat neck or you play a real skinny neck, you actually have to adjust where the pads of your fingers hit the strings. And now, that's not even saying from one person to the other. That's just one person. So I play a fat neck Les Paul. I don't like them, but I play a fat neck Les Paul, for instance, differently than I would play a Ibanez with a wizard style neck on it, because my hand size is going to grip the neck differently. Okay, so this means that, and you've had this happen to you before, where you've picked up two different guitars and it makes you kind of feel like you want to play two completely different styles of music. Well, a couple of the main reasons that happens is because the neck profile is different and it just feels different. Some people can't even play a different neck profile. Some people can play all kind of different neck profiles, but they play different. They sound different when they play them. I'm talking about the same person, not from person to person. The same thing happens with string weight. When we go from 8s to 9s to 10s to 11s on up to a 13, which is crazy. I couldn't play a 13. And then the other same thing happens with scale length to an extent, but that gets a little bit more technical. But the bottom line is the neck and the left hand, that is really your first interface with the guitar. And the shape of the neck, the tension of the strings can affect how you hold the neck, and therefore they can affect your tone. Something can be said also for the size of the frets, because the size of the frets make you, again, that changes the overall. If you think about this, a jumbo fret over a very small fret will actually change the overall dimension of the neck in your hand, because you don't push the string all the way to the fretboard most times. And so a bigger fret will actually change the overall dimension of the fret the neck from the front of the string to the back of the neck in your hand. All these things change how you interface with the guitar. They will change your tone. They will change how you play. They will change how you approach the guitar. And you'll find many times that you'll pick up a Les Paul or a Stratocaster, and you'll play those two guitars completely differently, not because they sound different, but because they feel different in your hands, because that interface has changed. So when people say, well, I played 8s and they were really, really weak, and you can't get good tone with tiny strings. Well, obviously you can, because many, many people do it. But the bottom line is their interface with the guitar is different than yours. and how they approach the neck with their left hand is different than yours. Billy Gibbons plays with a very, 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 very light touch. And, we could get all into how the string moves over the pickup and all that stuff. But I mean, the majority, and it is a thing, that it really is a thing, and we could talk about that at a later time. But the interface that your hand has with the guitar is way bigger of an effect than, quote unquote, the size of the magnetic field and the string and the cross section and all that, which is technical, and I know all that stuff, and we can share it with you later. But this is a way bigger deal. Because you can change, like I said, you think about that as a phrase. You change the interface of your left hand with the guitar when you change string weights, scale lengths, fret sizes, neck dimensions. All those things change how you hold the guitar with your left hand. Changes your tone. You grip it harder, you grip it lighter, you use the pads of your fingers or the flats of your fingers or the tips of your fingers, depending on how all of that stuff changes in your hand. So, those are big things. Okay. Now we mentioned scale length. Now scale length does get a little bit more technical than just the feel. A gentleman on Facebook, I believe on our Facebook page or maybe on last week's podcast, asked me about scale length and string tension. So the longer the scale length, and we've got a video on this on YouTube. If you look youtube.com/Dylan Pickups and you look in our Dylan Talks Tone playlist, you will see that we have a video on string tension and scale length. So there's a couple of things. The longer the scale length, if all things are exactly the same, there are some other design things in the guitar, but if the longer the scale length, the more tension it takes to maintain a certain pitch. So if the A string is tuned to A or the E string is tuned to E, that string has to be pulled tighter with a longer scale length than with a shorter scale length. This is why people say in their hands that a Les Paul feels slinkier than a Strat or a Tele. Now, the thing is that, remember when we discussed neck dimensions and nuts and all that stuff, a lot of that, you have different leverage because of longer frets per note and different string weights and different neck dimensions. So all of that stuff can kind of even out for a lot of people. But for some people, they really, really, really notice that difference. The other thing that gets a little bit more technical when it comes to scale length changing your tone is because if you go to our YouTube channel and you look at the video on how sound works in an electric guitar, we talk a little bit about nodes and antinodes, and I actually need to do a video just on this, about how the string moves within the magnetic field of the pickup. And the reason I mention it with scale length is because you have to actually, well, you don't have to, but it's a good idea to, when you design a guitar, to put the pickup in a proper spot. There is a particular place where it goes so that it is not in a antinode, which would be like a dead spot in how the string vibrates. Just to put that in a very simple term, we could do a video on that and get real complicated. But so pickup placement within a longer or shorter scale is definitely a tone thing that does change the tone. And some pickups don't sound that good with different scales of guitars. That's why with some of this new stuff, extended range guitars, like 8 strings and 7 strings, because even though the scale length doesn't change, the tension is definitely different in those bigger and smaller strings. So that definitely changes that as well. So when we talk about string weight, we talk about scale length, and we talk about the changes in neck dimensions. And a lot of this actually could apply to fretboard material as well, because you change how you hold the guitar depending on the fretboard material. Whether you want to believe that or not, you really, really do. And, whether the fretboard is finished or not on the edges, or whether the fretboard is finished. We could get into all kinds of debates about that, but basically how you hold the guitar is a bigger change in tone than any of that other stuff. So that's a big deal, how you hold the guitar. And if you think that it's not, change string weights. 1. And watch. You'll notice that in order to play successfully, I mean, I go down to 9s and I can barely play. But if to do that successfully, I have to do everything differently. I have to completely change how I play and hold the guitar. So, yeah, it's a thing. Let's see what else we got on our menu this evening. Let's see. We had a gentleman ask about the differences between, let's see. Okay, humbuckers, P90s, and or Filtertrons. There are some new guitar models coming out. There's actually quite a few. This actually just came up last night with a client of mine. For instance, like with a Duesenberg, where there's a very thin line between a humbucker and a single coil or a humbucker and a Filtertron style pickup because of the way they design their pickups. And a lot of people, and then there are hum-sized Filtertrons and all this stuff. So there's starting to get a little mud in there. All right, so humbuckers, a conventional humbucker, obviously 2 coils with 1 bar magnet in the bottom of the pickup, with slugs on one side of the pickup and screws on the other. Typically, that's a typical humbucker design, and that is going to give you, I mean, the range in power is very, very low to very, very high. You know, that's kind of a middle of the road thing. Filtertrons typically are two screw sides. They only have one. They have 2 screw sides. They don't have slugs at all. They are physically much smaller than a regular humbucker. The bobbin is tiny. The bobbin is very, very small. And the pickup output is very, very low. They also use a magnet that is a different dimension. It's actually more square and oblong than a typical humbucker magnet, which is more flat. And they're typically, they can be half the output in DC resistance and in the strength of the magnet of a typical humbucker. So they're definitely way, way lower output typically. Now there are some that are not, but they are typically much lower. A P90 is very interesting. And for some of you, this may be very, very basic stuff, but when we're making choices, it helps to kind of go through some of this stuff for some of us. P90s are only 1/4 of an inch tall. The coil is only 1/4 of an inch tall, and it is a very short and fat and wide coil, but it is still a single coil. And they can typically be up into the 8.5K, almost 9K range. You can pack a lot of wire on there, and you can vary your magnets because actually they only have center poles. They don't have 2 like a humbucker, obviously. And they are not hum canceling. They are single coil. And you can change the magnet strength, which is kind of cool. So, like Alnico 3, Alnico 5. You could do ceramic if you want. I don't know why you would, but so yeah. Those are the kind of the main differences. A lot of people like P90s if they want a between the single coil and a humbucker tone, right? But you could make them a little bit different. We actually make at Dylan Pickups, we make a humbucker sized P90, which fits in a humbucker route. It is built like a normal P90, but it is a little bit strattier sounding than a regular P90. If I could make that adjustment. And then the other thing is that we make actually is a humbucker sized Filtertron. So that actually is a very low output humbucker that has 2 screw sides. Looks just like a Filtertron, but it's actually humbucker size. So yeah, very, very cool stuff. Those are just some questions that I had from the internet. Some of them are a little bit basic. Some of them get a little bit more involved. I will tell you You ought to mess around. Definitely mess around with string tension stuff. Mess around with, if you've played tens all your life and that's all you've played, throw some nines on there and see what happens. I guarantee you that you will definitely approach the guitar differently, and it will affect how you play. I guarantee you that. Anyway, my name is Dylan. This has been Dylan Talks Tone, episode 3. We discussed some cool stuff. Hopefully, we will see you next week. And if you run into us on Facebook or on YouTube or on Twitter, definitely ask any questions you have, present them to us, and we will talk about them this coming week, on our podcast, Dylan Talks Tone, that is going to go live out to Periscope, live out to Facebook, out to YouTube tomorrow morning, and out to iTunes tomorrow morning. So check out our YouTube channel, Dylan Pickups. Check out our Facebook page, Dylan Pickups. And check out our iTunes podcast at Dylan Talks Tone. Thank you all, and we will see you next week.